3 minutes. That was all it took to turn my sister's fairy tale wedding into a funeral for my life. Standing in the suffocating darkness of a fitting room, I listened to my future brother-in-law and the sister I adored plot to inject me with drugs and commit me to an asylum the moment they cut the cake. They thought I was a lamb waiting for slaughter, but they had no idea a starving wolf was hiding right behind the wall. My name is Richard Davis. I am 42 years old, the CEO of Veritas Systems, and until exactly 45 minutes ago, I believed I was the architect of my own destiny. I walked into the plush, lavender-scented reception of Magda's Bridal Boutique on Fifth Avenue with a singular, benevolent purpose. I was there to play the role of the doting older brother, the patriarch who had stepped in when our parents died, the man who fixed everything. In the inside pocket of my bespoke charcoal suit sat a cashier's check for $150,000. It was a secret payment for the custom lace gown my younger sister Elena had been weeping over just yesterday, claiming it was too extravagant for her budget. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to see that specific sparkle in her eyes that appeared whenever I made her problems vanish. The shop was quiet, bathing in the soft golden glow of chandeliers that probably cost more than my first car. I adjusted my tie in the reflection of a gilded mirror, smiling at my own reflection like a naive fool. I looked successful. I looked secure. I looked like a man who had the world firmly beneath his heel. Then Magda appeared. She did not greet me with her usual warm embrace or the offer of espresso. Her face was the color of old parchment, draining of all blood. Her hands, usually so steady, when pinning hem of a $10,000 dress, were trembling violently. She did not speak. She rushed from behind the counter, her eyes darting toward the rear of the shop where the VIP suites were located, and grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by a terror I could not yet understand. Magda pulled me not toward the comfortable seating area, but into the narrow hallway lined with stockrooms. She shoved me into fitting room number 5. It was a small, cramped space, filled with discarded petticoats and the smell of stale perfume. Before I could ask her if she had lost her mind, she pressed a finger to her lips, her eyes wide and pleading. "Listen," she mouthed the word, barely forming a shape in the air. "You need to hear this to save your life." She killed the lights. The heavy velvet curtain swooshed shut, sealing me in total darkness. I stood there confused and irritated, my hand instinctively reaching for the check in my pocket. I opened my mouth to call out to demand an explanation, but then I heard it. The voice was muffled but unmistakable. It was coming from the VIP suite, directly adjacent to my hiding spot, separated only by a partition wall that was far thinner than it looked. It was Julian Thorne, my future brother-in-law. 30 years old, with the face of a movie star and the charm of a seasoned diplomat, Julian had swept Elena off her feet 6 months ago. I had my reservations about how quickly they had moved, but seeing Elena happy had been enough to silence my cynicism. But the voice I heard now did not hold the warm, deferential tone he used when asking me for a vintage scotch in my study. It was sharp, cold, and laced with a mockery that made my stomach turn. "He is so incredibly stupid," Julian said. The sound of fabric rustling accompanied his words, likely Elena trying on the dress I was there to pay for. "I mean, honestly, babe, I thought cracking a CEO of a tech giant would be hard work. I prepared myself for a siege. But Richard? He practically handed me the keys to the kingdom." I froze. The air in the fitting room suddenly felt very thin. I leaned closer to the wall, my ear pressed against the cool plaster. "He trusts family," a female voice replied. It was Elena, my little sister, the girl I had raised since she was 12. Her voice was not defensive. It was bored. "That is his fatal flaw. He thinks blood means loyalty. It is actually pathetic if you think about it." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited for the punchline. I waited for them to laugh and say they were rehearsing a play. But the laughter that followed was cruel and low. So the power of attorney is solid, Julian asked. Ironclad, Elena confirmed. I saw him sign it this morning. He thinks it is just for the 2 weeks we are in the Maldives in case of a business emergency. He did not even read the addendum on page 42. You were right. He just glanced at me, gave me that sad puppy dog smile and signed. He would sign his own death warrant if I told him it was a birthday card. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. I remembered that moment this morning. The way Elena had kissed my cheek, telling me I looked tired, telling me I needed to stop worrying about the company while they were on their honeymoon. I had signed the papers to ease her mind. Julian let out a satisfied sigh. Perfect. That gives us full control over his medical decisions if he becomes incapacitated. And coincidentally, he is about to become very incapacitated. What are we going to use? Elena asked. Her tone was casual, as if she were asking what they should order for dinner. Julian's voice dropped lower, conspiratorial and eager. I decided against the standard sedatives. They are too traceable, and if he just falls asleep, people might suspect a stroke or exhaustion. We need something dramatic, something that destroys his credibility before it destroys his mind. I managed to source a synthetic compound. It is a hallucinogen, but it mimics the rapid onset of paranoid schizophrenia. I stopped breathing. My hands, now slick with cold sweat, gripped the fabric of a dress hanging next to me to keep me upright. The shareholder meeting is next Thursday, Julian continued. We will swap out his daily anxiety medication on Wednesday night. By the time he steps up to the podium to present the quarterly earnings for Veritas Systems, he will not just be nervous. He will be seeing demons crawling out of the walls. He will be screaming at people who are not there. It will be a public meltdown of biblical proportions. The board will have no choice but to remove him immediately. But what if he recovers? Elena asked. There was a hint of anxiety in her voice, but it was not for my safety. It was for the plan. If they just send him to a regular hospital, the doctors might find the toxin in his blood. That is why we have the power of attorney, my love, Julian soothed her. As his next of kin, you will make the call. We will bypass the regular hospitals. We will have him committed directly to Blackwood. Blackwood. The name sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Blackwood was a private mental health facility upstate, known for its discretion and its high-security wing. It was a place where wealthy families hid their embarrassments. People went into Blackwood, but they rarely came out the same. The director of Blackwood owes me a significant favor from my days in Europe, Julian said. He has already prepared the intake forms. Diagnosis of acute psychotic break. Indefinite hold. Once Richard is behind those walls, he is gone. No phone calls. No visitors. Just a padded room and enough Thorazine to turn his brain into oatmeal. There was a silence on the other side of the wall. I prayed desperately for Elena to stop this. I wanted her to scream, to slap him, to run out of the room and call the police. I wanted my sister back. Instead, I heard the sound of a zipper being pulled up. Good, Elena said. I am so tired of waiting, Julian. I am tired of him looking over my shoulder. I am tired of his lectures about fiscal responsibility. He treats me like a child. Elena, do not buy that car. Elena, you need to invest. He is so controlling. He is so old-fashioned. I want my share of the inheritance now. I do not want to wait until he dies of old age. I want to live my life while I am still young and beautiful. Tears hot and stinging pricked my eyes. I bit down on my own knuckle to keep a sob from escaping. I had denied her nothing. I had paid for her education, her apartment, her travel, her hobbies. I had built a fortress of money around her to keep her safe, and she saw it as a prison. And the best part, Julian added, is that once he is declared mentally incompetent, we can liquidate his personal stock in Veritas. We will sell, right before the news of his breakdown fully tanks the market. We will walk away with hundreds of millions, and he will be sitting in a drool cup wondering why the spiders are talking to him. The cruelty was so absolute it felt physical, like a blow to the solar plexus. But the nightmare was not over. I heard the door to their suite open. A third set of footsteps entered, the click-clack of sensible heels on the hardwood floor, a sound I heard every single morning at 7 o'clock sharp. "Did you bring it?" Julian asked. "I have the updated security codes for his penthouse and the private elevator at Veritas," a woman's voice replied. My blood turned to ice. I would know that voice anywhere. It was efficient, crisp, and familiar. It was Sarah. Sarah had been my executive assistant for 10 years. She was the gatekeeper to my life. She knew my social security number, my allergies, my schedule, and the names of my first pets. I trusted Sarah more than I trusted most of my board members. I had just approved a 20% raise for her last week. "Here is the schedule for the next 3 days," Sarah said. Her voice lacked any emotion. "He is meeting with the auditors on Monday morning. You need to make sure the swap happens before then, or he might notice the discrepancies in the R&D accounts." "Do not worry," Sarah Julian said, his voice dripping with charm. "You have done excellent work. Once we sell the stock, your cut will be wired to the Cayman account as promised. $2 million. A nice retirement fund for a loyal employee." "It beats making coffee for a control freak for the rest of my life," Sarah replied dryly. "Just make sure he does not see it coming. Richard is smart. If he gets a whiff of this, he will destroy us. He will not see anything," Julian assured her. "He is blinded by love. He loves his sister. He trusts his assistant. And he thinks I am just a harmless trophy husband. The man is a walking tragedy waiting to happen." I slid down the wall until I hit the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The darkness of the fitting room felt heavy, pressing against my eyeballs. I felt like a child again, hiding in the closet, while my parents argued. Only this time, there was no one coming to open the door and tell me it was going to be all right. The betrayal was total. It was a perfect circle of knives, all pointing at my back. Elena, my heart. Julian, my friend. Sarah, my right hand. They had not just planned to kill me. Death would have been a mercy compared to this. They planned to erase me. They were going to strip me of my mind, my dignity, and my freedom. They were going to lock me away in a dark hole and feast on the carcass of the life I had built. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening to the banal sounds of them gathering their things. "This dress is perfect," Elena said, her voice light and happy. "Richard is going to pay for it, right? Magda said he was coming in today." "Oh, he will pay for it," Julian laughed. "He will pay for everything." I heard them leave the suite. I heard their footsteps fading down the hall, their laughter mingling with the soft classical music playing in the store. I sat there, in the silence, shaking. My hands were clenched so tightly that my fingernails cut into my palms, drawing blood. The pain was grounding. It was the only real thing in a world that had just dissolved into smoke. They thought I was the mark. They thought I was the fool who would smile as they slit my throat. I took a deep, shuddering breath, inhaling the scent of dust and deception. I wiped the tears from my face with the rough wool of my sleeve. When I opened my eyes in the dark, the sadness was gone. It had been incinerated by a white-hot rage that started in my gut and spread through every vein in my body. I was not going to Blackwood. I was not going to lose my mind. They wanted a show. They wanted a tragedy. I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit. I would give them a performance they would never forget. The Richard Davis they knew, the soft, loving brother, had died in this fitting room. The man who was about to walk out was something else entirely. I reached for the door handle. It was time to rewrite the script. The silence that followed their departure was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like the pressure at the bottom of the ocean. I waited for 2 minutes, then 3. I had to be certain they were gone, that they were not waiting in the lobby to see if the corpse of my dignity would stumble out after them. When I finally pushed the heavy velvet curtain aside, the light of the shop blinded me. I blinked my eyes, adjusting to the brightness that felt artificial and offensive compared to the dark truth I had just inhabited. Magda was standing right there. Her face was still ashen, her hands clasped tightly, in front of her apron, as if she were praying. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and pressed a small, cold object into my palm. It was a black USB drive. "Every VIP room has a camera," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard it barely carried the short distance between us. "For security. For theft. But the audio." I turned the audio on when I saw them go in together. I knew something was wrong, Richard. I felt it in my bones. I closed my fingers around the drive. It felt like a jagged stone, heavy with the weight of my sister's betrayal. "You tell no one," I said. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. It was raspy, devoid of the warmth I usually reserve for this woman who had fitted my mother for her anniversary gowns. "Not a soul, Magda. If they know you have this, they will come for you. And right now, I cannot stop them. Not yet. I promise." She choked out tears, finally spilling over her lashes. I reached for my wallet, not the checkbook this time, but a wad of cash I kept for emergencies. I placed $500 on the counter. "Lock the door behind me. Take the rest of the day off. Go home to your grandchildren." I did not wait for an answer. I turned and walked toward the rear exit, bypassing the front showroom, where the ghost of my happiness still lingered. I stepped out into the alleyway behind Fifth Avenue. The air smelled of wet pavement and exhaust fumes, a stark contrast to the lavender inside, but it felt cleaner. It felt real. I got into my car, a sleek black sedan that usually made me feel powerful. Today it felt like a coffin. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. My body wanted to scream. I wanted to drive straight to the nearest precinct, slam that USB drive onto the sergeant's desk, and demand they arrest Julian Thorne and Elena Davis for conspiracy to commit murder. But as I started the engine, the cold, logical part of my brain, the part that had built Veritas Systems into a billion-dollar empire, kicked into gear. If I went to the police now, what would happen? I had a recording of a conversation. A nasty conversation, yes, but could a lawyer spin it? Could Julian claim it was a dark joke? Could they say I was paranoid? And Elena, my sister. If I arrested her fiancé, she would claim coercion. She would cry. She would say she was afraid of him. Or worse, she would side with him, completely claiming I tampered with the tape. And the money. Julian had already been siphoning funds. Sarah had been cooking the books. If I tipped my hand now before I knew where the money was, Julian would vanish. He would take the millions he had stolen, leave Elena with the debt, and disappear into a non-extradition country. No. Arresting them was not enough. I needed to destroy them. I needed to make sure that when the trap snapped shut, there was absolutely no room for them to wiggle out. I merged into the traffic, driving with a mechanical precision. I had 2 weeks. 14 days until the wedding. 14 days until they planned to erase me. I arrived at my penthouse 20 minutes later. The apartment was a sprawling glass box overlooking Central Park, a monument to my success. I walked straight to the master bathroom and turned on the cold water tap. I splashed my face, scrubbing at my skin, as if I could wash away the filth of the last hour. I looked up at the mirror. The man staring back at me looked haunted. His eyes were red-rimmed, his mouth drawn in a tight line of pain. He looked like a victim. I hated him. I grabbed a towel and dried my face roughly. Then I stared into my own eyes again. "You are done," I told my reflection. "The Richard who blindly trusts is dead. He died in that fitting room. You are an actor now, and this is the role of a lifetime." I walked into my study and unlocked the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk. Inside was a burner phone I kept for corporate espionage countermeasures, a precaution I had never actually used until today. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago during a security briefing with a former government contractor. It rang twice. "This is a secure line," a voice answered. It was gravelly low and devoid of curiosity. "I need the ghost," I said. "Who is asking?" "Richard Davis." There was a pause. Then the tone shifted, becoming sharper. "I am listening. I need a full workup on a man named Julian Thorne and a woman named Sarah Jenkins. I need financials, aliases, travel history, and deep web footprints. And I need it fast. I am willing to pay triple your usual rate for exclusivity and speed. I can be in your office in an hour, the voice said. No office, I commanded. My office is compromised. Meet me at the safe house location. I will text you. And Victor, bring your best tech. I am being watched. I hung up. Victor Cray, ex-CIA. A man who specialized in making problems disappear for the 1%. He was the only person I could trust because his loyalty was purchased, not given. It was a transaction, and transactions I understood. I spent the next 2 hours in a frenzy of activity, but not the kind anyone watching would notice. I sat at my computer, seemingly reviewing the quarterly reports. In reality, I was drafting documents. I was forging my own signature. I was creating a labyrinth of paper that looked exactly like the keys to my kingdom, but opened absolutely nothing. At 7 o'clock, the chime of the elevator signaled their arrival. My stomach twisted violently, but I forced a smile onto my face. It was a rictus of muscle memory. I walked into the living room, just as the doors opened. Elena walked in first, radiant in a cream-colored dress, her face glowing with the excitement of a bride-to-be. Behind her was Julian, carrying a bottle of vintage red wine, looking every inch the devoted partner. And trailing them, clutching a leather portfolio, was Sarah, my assistant, my traitor. "Richard," Elena squealed, rushing forward to hug me. I held my breath as her arms went around me. Yesterday, this hug would have been the highlight of my week. Today, it felt like being wrapped in a python's coils. I could smell her perfume, lilac and jasmine. It made me want to retch. "Hey, kiddo," I said, patting her back. "You look beautiful." I pulled away before I could shudder. I looked at Julian and extended my hand. He took it, his grip firm and dry. "Good to see you, Richard," Julian said, his smile dazzling. "I brought that Cabernet you like. Thought we could celebrate. We are so close to the big day." "And Sarah," I said, nodding to her. "Working late?" She adjusted her glasses, offering me a shy, apologetic smile. "I am so sorry to intrude on family dinner, sir. But there are just a few loose ends with the merger paperwork that Julian mentioned you needed to sign before the honeymoon. I did not want you to be bothered with it next week." "Of course," I said, ushering them toward the dining table where my housekeeper had laid out a spread of roasted lamb and vegetables. "No rest for the wicked, right? Come sit. Let us eat first. Business later." The dinner was an exercise in torture. I watched Julian pour the wine. I watched him swirl it in the glass, holding it up to the light. Was he already testing the waters? Was there something in my glass now? I took a sip. It tasted like wine, but every bite of food felt like ash in my mouth. I listened to Elena chatter about the floral arrangements and the seating chart. She laughed about how stressed she was. She complained about the caterer. She sat there 3 feet away from me, eating the food I paid for, wearing the jewelry I bought her, and discussed her wedding while knowing that in 14 days, she would be locking me in a padded cell. The dissonance was maddening. I had to grip my fork so hard, the metal bit into my skin just to keep from stabbing the table. "So Richard," Julian said, leaning back as the plates were cleared. "About those papers. I know you hate the bureaucracy, but Sarah says the board is really pushing for that temporary power transfer. Just for the 2 weeks we are off the grid. You know, just in case something happens to the servers while you are sipping coconuts on the beach." I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, taking a moment to compose my features. I looked at him. I looked at the man who wanted to turn my brain into oatmeal. "You are right," I said, my voice steady. "I have been putting it off. I am just so protective of the company, you know." "It is my baby. We know," Richard. Sarah chimed in, sliding the leather portfolio across the mahogany table. "That is why we prepared everything exactly to your specifications. It just authorizes Julian to make emergency decisions if you are unreachable. Standard procedure." I opened the portfolio. The papers were there. Thick, creamy legal stock. The header of Veritas Systems. The dense paragraphs of legalese. I pretended to read them. I ran my finger down the lines, humming thoughtfully. In my peripheral vision, I saw Julian's leg bouncing under the table. He was nervous. He was hungry. I reached into my jacket pocket for my pen. As I did, I let the napkin fall from my lap. "Oops," I muttered. I bent down to retrieve it. In that split second, under the table, with the tablecloth shielding me from their view, I pulled the duplicate folder from the hidden pocket, taped to the underside of the chair. A trick I had seen in a spy movie once and never thought I would use. I shoved the real folder onto the chair and brought the fake one up with the napkin. It was a clumsy move, one that a professional magician would have laughed at. But they were not looking at my hands. They were looking at each other. They were exchanging glances of anticipation. I placed the folder back on the table. It looked identical. I uncapped my fountain pen. The ink was black. Permanent. "You know," I said, looking up at Elena. She was watching the pen tip her eyes wide. "Mom and Dad would have been so happy to see you settled, Elena. They always worried about you. They wanted to make sure you were taken care of." Elena swallowed hard. She reached out and touched my hand. "You have taken good care of me, Richard. You always have." The hypocrisy stung, but I used the pain. I let it fuel the smile I plastered onto my face. I signed the bottom of the page, then the next, and the next. "There," I said, closing the folder and pushing it back toward Sarah. "Done. You have the keys to the castle, Julian. Do not crash it while I am gone." Julian let out a breath he had been holding. He reached for the folder, his fingers brushing against mine. His skin was damp. "You have nothing to worry about, Richard," he said, his voice thick with triumph. "I will treat it like it is my own." "I trust you," I said. I looked him dead in the eye. "I trust you too, absolutely." I saw it then. A quick darting look between Julian and Sarah. A micro-expression of smugness. A flash of teeth. They thought they had won. They thought the ink on that page was the seal on my doom. They had no idea that they had just accepted legal responsibility for a shell corporation I had created 10 minutes ago, one that possessed nothing but debt, and a liability clause that would trigger a federal audit the moment they tried to access the accounts. "Let us toast," I said, raising my glass. "To family." "To family," they echoed. I drank the wine. It finally tasted sweet. The game had begun, and for the first time all day, I knew I was going to win. The coordinates Victor sent me led to a nondescript industrial park in Queens, the kind of place you drive past 1,000 times without ever wondering what happens behind the corrugated steel shutters. There were no signs, no logos, just a rust-colored door with a keypad that looked like it had been salvaged from a Soviet submarine. I punched in the code I had received via encrypted text, and the lock disengaged with a heavy pneumatic hiss. Inside, the air was scrubbed clean, smelling of ozone and cooling fans. It was a stark contrast to the humidity of the city night. This was not an office. It was a fortress of information. Banks of servers hummed in the darkness, their LEDs blinking in a synchronized rhythm, like the heartbeat of a digital beast. In the center of the room, illuminated by the glow of 6 high-definition monitors arranged in a semicircle, sat Victor Cray. He did not turn around when I entered. His fingers flew across a mechanical keyboard, the clicking sound rapid and aggressive like gunfire. "You are late," he said, his voice flat. "Traffic," I lied. I walked over to the desk, the adrenaline from the dinner with my executioners slowly transmuting into a cold, hard focus. "What do you have?" Victor spun his chair around. He was a man who looked like he was made of granite and wire, with eyes that had seen too many things that could not be unseen. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He hit a single key, and the center monitor flared to life. A face appeared. It was Julian, but younger. His hair was shorter, his jawline less refined, but the eyes, those predatory, charming eyes, were unmistakable. "Meet Marcus Vane," Victor said. I stared at the screen. Marcus Vane. The name tasted like bile. "Julian Thorne does not exist," Victor continued pulling up a timeline that stretched across the screen. The identity was created 5 years ago. Birth certificate, social security number, university transcripts, all high-quality forgeries. I had to dig into the physical archives of a small parish in Louisiana to prove the real Julian Thorne died in a boating accident when he was 4 years old. Your brother-in-law is a ghost wearing a dead child's name. Who is he really? I asked, leaning closer. A professional parasite, Victor said. He specialized in the European circuit. I ran his facial biometrics against the Interpol database. He flagged immediately. Victor swiped his hand, and 3 new windows popped up. They were police reports scanned and translated from French and Italian. Case number 1. Lyon, France. 7 years ago. The de Valois family. Vineyards. Old money. Marcus, going by the name Sebastian, romanced the heiress. 6 months later, the father committed suicide after his accounts were drained. The daughter was left with a chateau she could not afford to heat and a mountain of debt. Marcus vanished. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Case number 2. Milan, Italy. 4 years ago. The Ricci textile empire. The patriarch died in a car accident due to brake failure. The investigation was inconclusive. The fiancé, a man named Arthur, liquidated the assets and disappeared before the funeral. The daughter ended up in a rehab facility destitute. Victor pointed to the 3rd file. And here is the kicker. He does not work alone. In every single one of these cases, there was an inside man, or rather an inside woman, a secretary, a personal assistant, a nanny, someone who knew the codes, the schedules, the weaknesses. My stomach dropped. Show me, I commanded. Victor typed a command. A grainy photograph appeared on the screen. It was taken from a security camera in a casino in Monte Carlo dated 7 years ago. 2 people were standing at a roulette table. The man was clearly a younger Julian, or Marcus. His arm was draped possessively around a woman in a red dress. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a cigarette in one hand and a stack of chips in the other. It was Sarah, my Sarah, the woman who brought me my coffee every morning at 6, the woman who knew the birthdays of my nieces and nephews, the woman I had just promoted. They have been together for nearly a decade, Victor said, his voice devoid of sympathy. She is not just an employee, Richard. She is his partner. She was planted at Veritas Systems specifically to wait for him. She has been curating your life, filtering your information and isolating you so that when Marcus arrived, you would be ripe for the picking. I walked away from the screens, pacing the small length of the room. The betrayal I felt earlier was a dull ache. This was sharp, surgical. It made sense now. The accidental meetings, the way Sarah had encouraged me to spend more time with family, the way she had praised Julian constantly in the early days of his courtship with Elena. I had been herded like cattle. Follow the money, I said, turning back to Victor. Where is it going? Victor brought up a complex web of transactions. I ran a forensic audit on the Veritas accounts, using the back-end access you gave me. It is subtle. Very subtle. They are burying the theft under the research and development budget. He pointed to a series of transfers. Here. Project Icarus. Project Gemini. These are not real projects, are they? No, I said. We do not have any projects with those code names. I thought not. Over the last 6 months, Sarah has approved invoices totaling $5 million to shell companies in Panama. The companies are registered to a bearer bond structure, meaning whoever holds the paper owns the money. But I traced the IP address used to access the accounts. It pings back to a laptop registered to Julian Thorne. $5 million. They had already bled me, and I had not even felt the prick. But that is just the appetizer, Victor said. The main course is what they are planning for next week. I hacked into the servers of Blackwood Sanatorium. The image on the screen changed to a scanned document. It was a patient intake form. My name was at the top. Richard Davis. Date of admission, blank. Diagnosis: acute paranoid schizophrenia with violent tendencies. At the bottom of the page was the signature of Dr. Eris Thorne. No relation, just a coincidence, or perhaps why Julian chose the alias. Julian paid Dr. Thorne $200,000 in cryptocurrency 3 days ago, Victor explained. The diagnosis is already written. The treatment plan is approved. It involves heavy sedation and isolation therapy. Basically, they are going to drug you until you cannot speak and then lock you in a room where no one can hear you scream. It is a one-way ticket, Richard. In the eyes of the law, you will be insane. Everything you say will be dismissed as a delusion. I stared at the document. It was a death certificate for my soul. And Elena, I asked. The question came out quieter than I intended. I had been clinging to a shred of hope, a desperate, pathetic wish that my sister was being manipulated, that she was just a girl in love who had gotten in over her head, that perhaps Julian had threatened her. Victor hesitated for the first time. He looked at me, assessing my stability. You need to see this. He opened a video file. The timestamp was from this morning, 2 hours before I arrived at the bridal shop. The location was the living room of my sister's apartment. I had paid for that apartment. I had picked out the furniture. On the screen, Elena was pacing. She looked agitated. Julian was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. "He is taking too long to die," Elena said. Her voice was sharp, petulant. "We have been over this," Julian replied calmly. "We cannot rush the chemical imbalance. It has to look natural." "I hate him," Elena spat out. She stopped pacing and looked at a framed photo of us on the mantel. A photo taken at her graduation. She knocked it face down. "I hate the way he looks at me. Like I am some charity case. Like I am his failure." "Elena, be careful. Elena, do not spend too much. He thinks he is a god because he made some software. He loves you," Julian said, though his tone was mocking. "He loves controlling me," she countered. She walked over to Julian and straddled his lap. "I want the money, Julian. I want all of it. I want to be the one on the magazine covers. I want to be the CEO of Veritas. When he is gone, everyone will look at me. I will be the tragic heiress who stepped up to save the family legacy. They will love me." She grabbed Julian's face and kissed him. It was a hungry, desperate kiss. And then she pulled back and smiled, a smile so cold it made the blood in my veins freeze. "Make sure he suffers," she whispered, "for making me feel small all these years. Make sure he knows it was me." Victor paused the video. The image froze on Elena's face, twisted in a mask of pure malice. I stood there for a long time. The silence in the bunker was absolute. The hum of the servers seemed to fade away. Inside me, something broke. It was the final tether to my humanity, the last instinct to protect my little sister. The girl I had carried on my shoulders, the girl I had read bedtime stories to when our parents died. She was gone. In her place was a monster of my own making, fed by my generosity and poisoned by her own envy. "She is not a victim," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a man who was closing a deal. "She is the architect." Victor nodded slowly. "Jealousy is a powerful drug, Richard. She does not just want your money. She wants your life. She wants to be you." I turned away from the screen. I could not look at her anymore. "I want them all," I said. "I do not want them to just go to jail for fraud. I want them buried. I want the kind of sentence that ensures they die in concrete boxes." "Then we need more," Victor said, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "The recording in the shop is inadmissible in court because of privacy laws. The forensic accounting is strong, but a good lawyer could argue Sarah acted alone and Julian was unaware. We need undeniable proof of conspiracy to commit murder and kidnapping. We need to catch them in the act." I walked back to the desk, placing my hands flat on the cool metal surface. "I will give them the act," I said. "I am going to play my part perfectly. I will take the fake pills. I will let them think I am losing my mind. I will let them lead me all the way to the edge of the cliff. It is dangerous, Victor warned. If they dose you with the real stuff, even once they won't, I interrupted. Because I am going to switch the supply. But I need you to document everything. Every text message, every email, every whisper. I want cameras in my office, in my penthouse, in my car. I want to know when they breathe. I can rig your entire life with surveillance by tomorrow morning, Victor said. But Richard, you have to understand. Once we start this, there is no turning back. You have to let them believe they are winning until the very last second. You have to look your sister in the eye and tell her you love her while knowing she is holding the knife. I looked at the frozen image of Elena one last time. I do not have a sister, I said. I have a target. Victor nodded. He understood. He typed a final command and the printer in the corner whirred to life. Here is the dossier, he said. I call it the crocodile file. Because they are predators, Richard. They lie in wait, they shed fake tears, and they drag you down. But you are about to drain the swamp. I took the stack of warm paper. It felt heavy, like a weapon. Get the cameras ready, Victor. The wedding is in 2 weeks. That is where it ends. Not in a hospital. Not in a boardroom. I am going to take them down in front of the entire world. I turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. The air outside would be humid and thick, but it would not be as suffocating as the truth I now carried. I had the facts. I had the motive. And now, I had the will to do what had to be done. The hunt was on. The realization that my murder had been a slow-motion affair, a dress rehearsal played out over months, hit me while I was staring at a bowl of oatmeal in my kitchen. It was 3 months ago that I had ended up in the emergency room, writhing in agony, my body expelling everything I had consumed until I was dry heaving bile. The doctors had called it a severe case of food poisoning, likely a bad oyster from a business lunch. But I had not eaten oysters that day. I had come home early with a migraine and Elena had been there. I closed my eyes, the memory washing over me with a new, sinister clarity. Elena had been so sweet that evening. She had insisted on making me her special chicken soup, the one our mother used to make. She had sat by my bedside wiping my forehead with a cool cloth while I groaned in pain. At the time, I saw a loving sister caring for her sick brother. Now I saw a scientist observing a lab rat. She was testing the dosage. She was seeing how much poison my system could handle before it shut down. That night in the hospital was not an accident. It was a calibration. The danger was not just in my food. It was woven into the very infrastructure of my life. 2 days after my meeting with Victor, I was at the Veritas Systems headquarters. My office is on the 42nd floor, accessible by a private executive elevator that requires a keycard and a retina scan. It is the safest way to travel in the building, or so I thought. I stepped into the elevator car at noon, heading down for a lunch meeting. The doors slid shut with a reassuring swoosh. The car began to descend smoothly. Then, with a sound like a gunshot, the overhead cable groaned. The lights flickered and died. For a heartbeat, there was total weightlessness. My stomach slammed into my throat as the car dropped. It fell 2 floors in freefall. The emergency brakes kicked in with a screech of tearing metal that sounded like a banshee's wail. The car jerked to a violent halt, throwing me against the mahogany-paneled wall. I hit my shoulder hard, the breath knocked out of me. I slid to the floor, gasping in the pitch black, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I hung there in the dark for 20 minutes before the maintenance crew pried the doors open between the 39th and 40th floors. I had to climb out my suit covered in dust, my shoulder throbbing. Sarah was waiting in the lobby, her face a mask of frantic concern. "Oh my God, Richard!" she cried, rushing over to me with a bottle of water. I called maintenance the second the alarm went off. "Are you okay?" We were so terrified. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had been sleeping with the man who wanted me dead. I remembered the log files Victor had shown me. Sarah had called the elevator maintenance company the day before for a routine inspection. The technician who signed off on the work had been fired from his last 3 jobs for negligence. It was not a coincidence. It was a trap. They wanted to see if I would break. They wanted to see if a near-death experience would make me more pliable, more willing to hand over the reins. I took the water bottle, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of not grabbing her by the throat. "I am fine, Sarah," I said, forcing a weak, shaky laugh. "Just a mechanical glitch. These old buildings, right? No need to make a fuss. Let us not spook the shareholders with rumors of safety issues." I saw the disappointment flicker in her eyes for a nanosecond before she covered it with relief. She wanted me to be rattled. She wanted me to be paranoid. By brushing it off, I was ruining their script. But the most chilling discovery came that evening. I met Victor in the back seat of a nondescript sedan parked 3 blocks from my apartment. He handed me a small plastic vial containing a white powder. "We tested the vitamins you take every morning," Victor said. "The ones Sarah refills for you?" I nodded. I had been taking a custom multivitamin blend for years. Sarah always kept the bottle on my desk, ensuring I never missed a dose. "It is arsenic," Victor said flatly. "Not enough to kill you instantly. That would be too messy. It is a microdose. Over time it causes fatigue, confusion, memory loss, and paranoia. It mimics the symptoms of the mental breakdown they are trying to fabricate. When they check you into Blackwood, your blood work will show heavy metal poisoning, but they will claim it is a side effect of your psychosis medication or just bury the results entirely." I held the vial up to the street lamp outside the window. It looked so innocent. Just white dust. "I replaced them with sugar pills 3 days ago," Victor continued. "You should start feeling your energy coming back. But you have to act tired, Richard. You have to stumble. You have to forget words. If you look too healthy, they will increase the dose and the next one might not be something I can swap out." "I understand," I said, pocketing the vial. "They want a sick man. I will give them an invalid." The next morning, I initiated the next phase of my counterattack. It was time to feed the sharks. I called Sarah into my office. I had spent an hour in front of the mirror practicing my performance. I made sure my tie was slightly crooked. I left dark circles under my eyes uncovered by concealer. I slumped in my chair, rubbing my temples, as if I were fighting a splitting headache. "Sarah," I said, my voice weary. "Close the door, please." She did, walking over to my desk with her notepad ready. "Yes, Richard. Do you need some aspirin?" "No," I said, sighing. I have been doing a lot of thinking. The accident in the elevator made me realize how fragile life is. And with Elena getting married, I feel like things are changing so fast. She watched me, her eyes predatory behind her glasses. "Change is natural, Richard. You have been working too hard," I know I said. "And I realized I have not shown you enough appreciation. You have been the rock of this company, Sarah. While I have been distracted, you have kept everything running." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a velvet box. It contained a diamond tennis bracelet I had bought years ago for a girlfriend I never proposed to. It was worth $20,000. I slid it across the desk. "This is just a small token," I said. "But I want to talk about your future. After the wedding, when I come back from my break, I want to make you vice president of operations. You practically run the place anyway. It comes with a significant salary bump and stock options." Sarah stared at the bracelet, then at me. Her mouth opened slightly. For a moment the mask slipped. I saw the naked greed. I saw the triumph. She thought she had won completely. She thought she had manipulated me into handing her the keys to the kingdom right before she destroyed me. "Oh, Richard," she breathed, reaching for the box. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will accept," I said, giving her a tired, trusting smile. "I need to know the company is in good hands. I trust you, Sarah, more than anyone." "Thank you," she said, clutching the diamonds. "You can count on me." She left the office, walking on air. I watched her go, my smile vanishing the instant the door clicked shut. "Enjoy the jewelry, Sarah. It will be the only thing you have left to barter with in prison." Now it was time for the hook. Victor had swept my office and found 3 listening devices. One under my desk, one in the potted ficus, and one behind the painting of the company founders. We had left them active. They were my direct line to their ears. At 4 o'clock, I staged a phone call. I used my landline to call Victor, who was posing as my Swiss banker. "Yes, Henri," I said, speaking clearly into the receiver, leaning back so my voice would carry to the bug under the desk. "I know it is unconventional, but with the wedding coming up, I want to secure the assets." I paused, listening to Victor's silence on the other end. "Correct," I continued. "The Sentinel account. There is $50 million in there. I want it moved to the holding trust." But I lost the physical key. I waited a beat. "Yes, I know. My biometrics are the only way to access it. I have to physically scan my thumbprint at the terminal to authorize the transfer. I will do it the morning of the wedding. I want it done before the ceremony, so I can give Elena the surprise of her life. $50 million untraceable just for her future children." I hung up the phone. The bait was $50 million, a number large enough to make anyone greedy, but specifically large enough to make Julian and Sarah rethink their timeline. If they drugged me and threw me into Blackwood before the wedding, they would never get that money. My fingerprint would be useless if I was incapacitated or legally insane before the transfer. I left the office early, pleading exhaustion. I went straight to my penthouse, where Victor had set up a secure listening post in the guest bedroom, shielded from the bugs they had planted in my living room. He handed me a headset. "They are talking," he said. I put the headphones on. The audio was crystal clear. It was coming from Julian's apartment. "Did you hear that?" It was Sarah's voice. $50 million. In the Sentinel account." "I thought he was broke," Julian shouted. "I thought we had drained him." "He must have moved it from the offshore holdings before we got access," Sarah said. $50 million, Julian. If we send him to Blackwood on Friday, we lose that money. We cannot access a biometric lock if he is in a straitjacket." There was a silence. I could hear them breathing. I could hear the gears turning in their heads. "Okay," Julian said. "Change of plan. We do not dose him on Wednesday. We keep him lucid. We let him go to the wedding." But Sarah protested. "Screw the plan," Julian snapped. $50 million is worth the delay. We let him play the happy brother. We let him go to the ceremony. We let him scan his thumb and unlock that account. And then? Then what? "Then we take him," Julian said. His voice dropped to a sinister whisper. "We do not wait for the asylum. We grab him right after the reception. We tell everyone he had a drunken episode, and we are taking him home. We take him to the boat. We force him to transfer that money to us. And then we dump him," Sarah finished. "Exactly. We dump him in the ocean. He drowns. Tragic boating accident. The grieving sister inherits everything. And we are $50 million richer." I took the headphones off. My hands were steady. They had taken the bait. By dangling the money, I had bought myself time. I had ensured that I would be walking into that wedding clear-headed, sober, and undrugged. They wouldn't touch me because they needed my thumb. But there was one more layer to the deception. Later that night, another intercept came through. This time, it was a call between Julian and Elena. "Hey, baby," Julian said, his voice smooth as silk. "Is it done?" Elena asked. "Is he going to be crazy by the rehearsal dinner?" "Actually, I have been thinking," Julian said. "It is too risky to do it before the wedding. Too many people around. If he starts screaming at the altar, it ruins your big day." "You do not want your wedding photos to be of your brother being dragged away in handcuffs, do you?" "No," Elena said. "I want it to be perfect." "Exactly. So here is the new plan. We let him enjoy the wedding. We let him give his speech. And then when the party is dying down, I will give him the dose. We will take him to Blackwood quietly in the night. It will be more dignified." He was lying to her. He didn't tell her about the $50 million. He didn't tell her about Sarah. And he certainly didn't tell her about the plan to murder me on a boat. To Julian, Elena was just another mark. He was going to use her to get the money, and then He would likely discard her too, leaving her with a dead brother and an empty bank account while he vanished with his mistress. I sat in my living room, the lights off. The city skyline twinkled outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent to my plight. I picked up the framed photograph from the side table. It was the last picture of my parents taken a week before the car crash that killed them. They looked so happy. They looked so proud. They had left me one job: take care of Elena. I ran my thumb over the glass, covering my sister's smiling face. "I am sorry, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. I failed. I tried to protect her from the world, but I could not protect her from herself. I poured myself a glass of scotch, the first real drink I had allowed myself in days. I swirled the amber liquid, watching the vortex. I had to send my sister to prison. It was the only way to save the company. It was the only way to save the legacy. And in a twisted way, it was the only way to save her from Julian. If I let this play out, she would end up an accessory to murder, or a victim herself. I was alone. The penthouse, once a symbol of my achievement, now felt like a fortress under siege. But I was the commander now. I had the intelligence. I had the strategy. And come Saturday, I would have the victory. I drained the glass. The burn of the alcohol was grounding. "Let them come," I said to the shadows. "Let them come for the 50 million. I will give them something much more valuable. I will give them justice." The rain in Seattle was relentless. It washed over the windshield of our rental car in gray, depressing sheets, blurring the world into a watercolor painting of sorrow. It was fitting weather for what we were about to do. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the wipers fight a losing battle, while Victor drove us away from the polished glass towers of downtown and into a neighborhood that had clearly seen better decades. We were looking for a ghost, or rather the wreckage a ghost had left behind. Her name was Isabella Rossini. 5 years ago, she had been on the cover of society pages in Milan, the heiress to a textile fortune that dated back to the Renaissance. Today, according to Victor's intel, she was working double shifts as a waitress at a diner and living in a crumbling walk-up apartment in Tacoma. We pulled up to a building with peeling paint and bars on the ground floor windows. I felt a pang of guilt, heavy and sharp. This was the future my sister was sprinting toward, and she did not even know it. Victor stayed in the car to monitor the perimeter. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs, the smell of damp carpet and stale cigarette smoke clinging to the air. I knocked on door number 3B. There was a long pause. Then the sound of a chain sliding back. The door opened, just a crack. A woman stared out at me. She was thin, her face gaunt, her hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun. But beneath the fatigue and the cheap clothes, the bone structure was undeniable. The eyes were dark and fierce. "Isabella?" I asked softly. She looked me up and down, taking in my tailored coat, my watch, the shoes that cost more than her rent for a year. Her expression hardened. "I am not buying whatever you are selling," she said, her voice raspy. "And if you are a debt collector, you are wasting your time. There is nothing left to take." "I am not here to take anything," I said. "I am here to give you something. I am here to give you Arthur." The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might faint. She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles turning white. "Arthur," she whispered. The name sounded like a curse coming from her lips. "His real name is Marcus Vane," I said. "But right now he is calling himself Julian Thorne. And he is about to marry my sister in New York." Isabella closed her eyes. For a moment she just stood there, breathing shallowly. Then she opened the door wide. "Come in." Her apartment was tiny, a studio with a mattress on the floor and a small table covered in bills. But it was clean. On the wall, there was a single framed photograph of an older man with kind eyes. Her father. I sat on a folding chair while she made tea. Her hands shook as she poured the water. "He killed him, you know," she said. She did not look at me. She looked at the steam rising from the cup. "My father. He did not pull a trigger, but he killed him just the same." "Tell me," I said. Arthur or Marcus, whatever that monster calls himself, he came into our lives like a prince, she began. He was so charming, so attentive. He knew everything about art, about history. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. We were married within 4 months. She took a sip of tea, her eyes distant. My father was skeptical at first, but Arthur won him over. He helped with the business. He found inefficiencies. He suggested we move our liquid assets into a secure trust to avoid taxes. It sounded so smart. I nodded. The script was identical. 3 weeks after the wedding, my father had a massive stroke, Isabella said, her voice cracking. He died 2 days later. Arthur was devastated. He cried harder than I did at the funeral. He held my hand. He told me he would take care of everything. And then? I asked, though I already knew the answer. And then the creditors came, she said. The secure trust was empty. The accounts were overdrawn. Arthur had taken loans out against the factories using my father's forged signature. When the bank came to seize the house, Arthur said he was going to meet with a lawyer. He kissed me on the forehead, told me to be brave, and walked out the door. I never saw him again. She looked up at me, and the raw agony in her eyes was difficult to witness. They took everything. The house, the cars, my mother's jewelry. I was left with $12 million in debt and a reputation as the foolish girl who let a con man destroy a legacy. I had to run away. I had to change my name. I have been hiding in this hole for 5 years, waiting for the statute of limitations on the debts to run out. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a photo of Julian and Elena, taken at their engagement party. Is this him? I asked. Isabella took the photo. Her fingers trembled. She traced the face of the man smiling at the camera. Yes, she hissed. That is him, older. But that is the same smile, the same dead eyes. She looked at Elena. And this is the new victim. My sister, I said. Isabella let out a bitter, dry laugh. She looks happy. I was happy too. It is the happiest you will ever be right before the fall. I need you to come to New York, Isabella, I said. I am going to expose him. But I need a witness. I need someone who can stand up in front of the world and say who he really is. I cannot, she said, shrinking back. If I go back the press, the shame he has $5 million stashed in Panama, I said. And he is trying to steal $50 million more from me. If we catch him, if we convict him, the assets will be frozen. There will be restitution. You can get your life back, Isabella. You can clear your father's name. She looked at the photo of her father on the wall. She stared at it for a long time. Then she turned back to me. Do you have proof? She asked. Real proof. Because he is slippery, he covers his tracks. I have forensic accounting, I said. I have recordings. But I need something physical. Something that links Arthur to Julian. Isabella stood up. Bella. She walked over to a battered shoebox in the corner of the closet. She pulled out a stack of letters tied with a ribbon and a small, leather-bound diary. He wrote me letters, she said. He has a very distinctive handwriting. The way he crosses his T's. The way he loops his Y's. Compare them to what he writes now. It will be a match. She dug deeper into the box and pulled out a Polaroid photo. It was blurry, taken on a beach, intimate and candid. It showed a man from behind, shirtless, walking into the surf. And this, she said, handing it to me. I looked at the photo. On the man's lower back, just above the hip bone, was a tattoo. It was small, intricate and specific. A Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, encircling a date in Roman numerals. He told me it was the date his mother died, Isabella said. But later, I found out it was the date he pulled off his first big con. He never lets anyone see it. He wears rash guards when he swims. He is paranoid about it because it is the one permanent thing on his body. I looked at the photo. I had seen Julian swim at my pool. He always wore a swim shirt. I had assumed he was just self-conscious about sunburn. Does he still have it? I asked. Unless he flayed his own skin off, yes, she said. This is it, I said, feeling the weight of the evidence. This is the nail in the coffin. I looked her in the eye. Pack your bags, Isabella. We are flying first class. The flight back to New York was somber. Isabella slept for the first few hours, exhausted by the emotional toll of dredging up her past. I sat across from her, staring at the dark clouds outside the window, drinking black coffee that tasted like battery acid. Victor came out of the cockpit where he had been using the satellite uplink. His face was grim. "We have a problem," he said, sitting down opposite me. Or rather, a clarification. "What is it?" I asked. "I hacked into the airline's reservation system," Victor said. "I wanted to track their movements after the wedding. You know, to see where they planned to take you for the accident." "And? I found the tickets," Victor said. 2 one-way tickets to the Maldives, departing at 2 in the morning on Sunday, 4 hours after the reception ends. "The Maldives," I said. "No extradition treaty with the United States. Smart." "That is not the interesting part," Victor said. He slid his tablet across the table. "Look at the passenger manifest." I looked at the screen. First class. Seat 1A and Seat 1B. The names were clearly listed. Mr. Julian Thorne, Miss Sarah Jenkins. I stared at the screen, my brain taking a moment to process the information. "Where is Elena?" I asked. Victor swiped to the next screen. There is no ticket for Elena Davis. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach, heavier and darker than anything I had felt before. He is not taking her, I realized. He is not just stealing the money. He is leaving her behind. "Think about the setup," Victor said, his voice low. "The fake company accounts are in her name. She has the power of attorney. She is the one who will sign the transfer for the $50 million. When he vanishes with Sarah and the money, who is left holding the bag? Elena," I whispered. "Exactly," Victor said. "The authorities will look at the forensic trail. It will look like Elena conspired to defraud you, killed you, or had you committed and then her partner ran off with the cash. She will be left with the debt, the criminal charges, and the absolute destruction of her life. He is setting her up to take the fall for everything." I looked out the window at the endless black sky. I had spent the last week hating my sister. I had listened to her voice on the recordings, plotting my demise. I had watched her mock me. I had prepared myself to send her to prison. But this was different. She was not the mastermind. She was the patsy. She was a useful idiot who had been seduced, manipulated, and groomed to be the scapegoat for a master criminal. She thought she was the queen of the chessboard, but she was just a pawn being sacrificed so the king could escape. And despite everything, despite the poison, despite the betrayal, despite the sheer malice she had shown me, she was still my little sister. She was the girl who used to be afraid of thunder. She was the girl I had promised my dying mother I would protect. "God damn it," I cursed, slamming my fist onto the leather armrest. Victor said warningly. "She is still guilty. She still agreed to hurt you." "I know," I snapped. "I know what she did. I know she deserves to pay. But she does not deserve this. She does not deserve to be left to rot while those two laugh all the way to a tropical island." I stood up and paced the narrow aisle of the jet. The anger was suffocating me. It was not the clean, cold anger of revenge anymore. It was a messy, hot, brotherly fury. I wanted to destroy Julian, not just for what he did to me, but for how he had weaponized my own family against me. He had turned my sister into a monster, and then planned to discard the monster when it was no longer useful. I walked back to the table and looked at the tablet. "Change of plans?" Victor asked. "No," I said. "The plan stays the same. We take them all down." But what?" "I am going to give her a chance," I said. Victor frowned. "Richard, do not be sentimental. She tried to poison you." "I know," I said. "And she will face the law for that. I will not stop the police. I will not hire her a lawyer. But I need to know. I need to know if there is any part of my sister left inside that shell. I need to look her in the eye one last time before the end." "And if she confesses?" Victor asked. "If she breaks down and tells you everything?" Then I will still send her to prison, I said hard. But at least I will know she was human. At least I will know I did not lose her completely to him. I looked at Isabella, who was stirring in her sleep, clutching the diary to her chest like a shield. And if she does not? I asked myself more than Victor. If she lies to you, Victor said, then you burn it all down. I nodded. We land in 4 hours, I said. The wedding is in 2 days. Tonight I am going to go to her room. I am going to give her one last off-ramp, one last chance to be a Davis instead of a Thorne. And if she takes the exit? She won't, I said, feeling the sad certainty of it in my bones. But for my own sanity, I have to offer it. I sat back down and watched the clouds drift by. I was about to break my own heart, I knew it. But it was the only way to make sure that when I swung the sword of justice, my conscience would be clean. The final countdown had begun. The corridor leading to the bridal suite was lined with vases of white hydrangeas, their petals already drooping slightly in the humid warmth of the summer evening. It was quiet here, away from the rehearsal dinner that was still raucous in the main hall downstairs. I could hear the faint thrum of the bass from the DJ booth, a rhythmic heartbeat that felt entirely disconnected from the funeral march playing in my own chest. I stood outside the mahogany double doors for a long time. My hand hovered over the brass handle. This was it, the precipice. Inside that room was the little girl I had carried on my shoulders at Disney World. Inside that room was the teenager who had wept into my shirt when her first boyfriend broke her heart. And inside that room was the woman who had agreed to inject me with poison and erase my existence for a payout. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the wave of nausea that threatened to rise. I was not going in there as a prosecutor. I was going in as a brother. This was the last off-ramp on the highway to hell, and I was the only one who could open the gate for her. I knocked. 3 sharp raps. 3. Come in, a voice called out. It sounded brittle. I pushed the door open. The room was expansive, a master suite dominated by a 3-way mirror in the center. Elena stood on a pedestal bathed in the soft golden light of the vanity lamps. She was wearing the dress. It was a masterpiece of lace and silk, the one I had paid $150,000 for. It hugged her frame perfectly, cascading down like a waterfall of cream. She looked breathtaking. She looked like a princess from a storybook. But then, I looked at her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and there was a tremor in her hands as she adjusted the veil. She did not look like a blushing bride. She looked like someone waiting for the executioner. "Richard," she said, her voice jumping an octave. "I thought you were downstairs with the guests." I walked in and closed the door behind me, locking out the world. "I needed a moment with the bride," I said softly. I leaned against the doorframe, hands in my pockets, studying her. "You look beautiful, Elena." Mom would have been crying her eyes out right now. Elena flinched. The mention of our mother was a calculated strike, and it landed. She turned away from the mirror, her fingers nervously picking at the lace on her bodice. "Do you think so?" she asked, her voice small. "I feel like I cannot breathe in this thing. It is too tight." "It is just nerves," I said, pushing off the doorframe and walking slowly toward her. I stopped a few feet away, invading her personal space, just enough to make it intimate, but not threatening. "Do you remember the night Mom and Dad died?" She looked up, startled. "Why are you bringing that up now?" "Because I am thinking about promises," I said. I sat down on the edge of the velvet ottoman near her pedestal. I remember sitting in that hospital waiting room. The fluorescent lights were humming. You were 12. You were wearing those ridiculous pink pajamas because we had to rush there in the middle of the night. You were shivering. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, the silk of her dress crinkling. "Stop it, Richard." I held your hand. I continued, my voice steady and low. "And I promised you that no matter what happened, no matter how scary the world got, I would always protect you. I promised that you would never be alone. And I promised that I would burn down the world before I let anyone hurt you." Tears welled up in her eyes. One escaped, tracking a line through her perfect makeup. "I know," she whispered. You have been good to me. I stood up and took a step closer. I reached out and took her hands. They were ice cold. I have tried, Elena. I have not been perfect. Maybe I was too controlling. Maybe I worked too hard and did not listen enough. But everything I did, every dollar I made, was to build a wall around you so you would be safe. She looked down at our joined hands. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. So tell me, I asked, dropping my voice to a whisper. Are you happy? Truly happy? She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide, darting back and forth, searching my face. What kind of question is that? I am getting married tomorrow. Of course I am happy. Are you? I pressed. Because you do not look happy. You look terrified. I am just stressed, she snapped, pulling her hands away. The wedding planning. The guests. It is a lot of pressure. I did not retreat. I looked straight into her soul. Is there anything you want to tell me, Elena? The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed. The distant bass thumped. Anything at all, I said. About Julian? About the company? About us? She froze. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Elena, I said, and I put every ounce of sincerity I had left into my voice. Listen to me carefully. We are family. Blood is thicker than anything. Thicker than money. Thicker than marriage. If you are in trouble. If you have made a mistake. If you have done something you think is unforgivable, tell me. Right now. She stared at me, her chest heaving. I will forgive you, I said. I promise you, right here, right now. If you tell me the truth, I will fix it. I will make it go away. We can walk out of here, we can get in the car and drive away. No wedding, no Julian. Just us. We can start over. For a second I saw it. I saw the armor crack. I saw the little girl who was scared of the dark peek out from behind the eyes of the woman who wanted me dead. She realized I knew. Or at least she realized I sensed the darkness. She took a step toward me. Her lip quivered. She reached out, her fingers brushing the lapel of my jacket. Richard, she choked out. I am so scared. Tell me, I urged, gently. Just say it. He makes me do things, she whispered. I did not mean for it to go this far. I just wanted what? I asked. I just wanted you to see me, she sobbed. But now I cannot stop it. He says she was there. She was right on the edge. She was about to confess. My heart hammered against my ribs. If she said it, if she gave me Julian, I could save her. I could get her a plea deal. I could send her to a facility instead of a prison. I could be her brother again. Just tell me, Elena, I said. What is the plan? She took a deep breath, her mouth forming the words. The door handle clicked. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Elena jumped back as if she had been burned. Her face slammed shut instantly, the vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of terror. The door opened, and Julian walked in. He was wearing a casual linen suit, looking relaxed and handsome, holding 2 glasses of champagne. But his eyes were not relaxed. They were cold, hard flints. He looked at Elena, then at me, assessing the distance between us, assessing the tears on her face. He knew. He had the instincts of a predator. He could smell the defection in the air. Well, isn't this a touching scene? He said, his voice smooth, but with an undercurrent of steel. The siblings, having a moment. He walked over to Elena, stepping directly between us. He placed a hand on her bare shoulder. His fingers dug in slightly. I saw Elena wince, but she did not pull away. You are upsetting her, Richard, Julian said, smiling at me. Look at her. She is a wreck. You should not be bringing up old tragedies the night before her wedding. It is bad luck. I was just asking her if she was happy, I said, not breaking eye contact with him. Julian laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Happy? She is marrying me. Of course she is happy. Right, darling. He squeezed her shoulder again. It was a warning, a physical reminder of who held the leash. Elena looked at me. Then she looked at Julian. I saw the calculation in her eyes. I saw the fear. But mostly, I saw the greed. She looked at his handsome face, and She thought about the $50 million. She thought about the freedom he promised her. She weighed her brother against her ambition, and the scale tipped. She took a step back, moving closer to Julian. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and forced a smile onto her face. It was a grotesque thing, stiff and lifeless. "I am fine, Richard," she said. Her voice was flat. "Julian is right. I am just emotional. You know how I get." I felt a coldness spread through my chest, extinguishing the last flicker of hope. She had made her choice. She had looked at the lifeboat I offered and chose to stay on the Titanic. "Are you sure?" I asked one last time. My voice was devoid of warmth now. "Because once I walk out that door, Elena, there is no coming back." She lifted her chin defiantly. "I am sure. You should go, Richard. You look tired. We have a big day tomorrow." I looked at her for a long, long moment. I memorized this face. Not the face of my sister, but the face of my enemy. "Yes," I said. "Tomorrow will be a day impossible to forget." I turned to leave. My movements were mechanical. I felt hollowed out, as if someone had scooped out my insides with a spoon. As I reached the door, I stopped. I turned back to look at Julian. He was sipping his champagne, watching me with a smug expression of victory. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully bullied her back into line. "Enjoy tonight, Julian," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Is that a toast?" "No," I said. "It is advice. Savor the sheets. Savor the wine. Savor the feeling of thinking you are the smartest man in the room. Because tomorrow, everything will change forever." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You are so dramatic, Richard. Go get some sleep. You are going to need your strength to walk her down the aisle." I did not reply. I walked out and closed the door. The corridor was empty. The hydrangeas still drooped. The bass still thumped. But the world had shifted on its axis. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady now. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. I opened the encrypted messaging app and typed a message to Victor. "Triankaika hoch omega." I typed my fingers, flying over the glass. "Execute omega plan. No mercy." I hit send. I watched the progress bar fill up and disappear. Message delivered. There were no more brothers, no more sisters, no more second chances. I walked down the hall toward the elevator, the sound of my footsteps echoing like the ticking of a clock. The countdown had ended. The war had begun. The sun rose over the Davis family estate in the Hamptons, like a spotlight being turned on for a grand finale. It was a crisp, brilliant morning, the kind that brides pray for and photographers dream of. The Atlantic Ocean churned against the cliffs below the lawn, the waves crashing with a rhythmic violence that matched the drumbeat in my chest. From my balcony, I watched the transformation of my home. White tents were rising like clouds on the manicured grass. Trucks from the city's most expensive florists were offloading thousands of white orchids. A string quartet was already warming up near the gazebo, their melody lost in the gusts of wind coming off the water. To the 300 guests arriving in their Bentleys and chartered helicopters, this was the wedding of the decade. It was the union of the beautiful Elena Davis and the charming Julian Thorne, a fairy tale funded by the Veritas Systems fortune. To me, looking down from the master suite with a cup of black coffee in my hand, it was not a wedding. It was a hunting ground. I was dressed in black. Not the midnight blue tuxedo I had originally tailored for the occasion, but a sharp, severe black suit that felt more like armor than formal wear. I adjusted my cufflinks, simple silver knots, and checked my reflection. The man in the mirror was cold. His eyes were hard. He was ready. I left the sanctuary of my room and moved through the house. It was buzzing with activity, a hive of caterers and planners, running on caffeine and panic. But amidst the chaos, I saw the threads of my own design. I walked past a waiter, carrying a tray of crystal flutes. He caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was Miller, one of Victor's best surveillance operatives. I glanced toward the sound booth being set up for the reception. The man testing the microphone was not a DJ. He was a forensic audio specialist. The perimeter was secure. Down the road, hidden behind a dense line of hedge and trees, a nondescript utility van was parked. Inside sat a team from the Economic Crimes Unit and 2 FBI agents Victor had called in favors with. They were drinking bad coffee and watching the live feeds from the cameras we had installed in every corner of the estate. They were waiting for the signal. We called it Operation Omega. I found Sarah in the hallway outside the bridal suite. She was frantic, juggling 3 phones and a clipboard barking orders at a terrified junior bridesmaid. When she saw me, her face shifted instantly from tyrant to the sweet, subservient assistant. "Richard," she exclaimed, rushing over. "You look dashing. Are you holding up okay?" "I know this is an emotional day for you." I looked at her. She was wearing a pale pink dress, the maid of honor. She looked innocent. She looked loyal. I knew that in her purse, vibrating against her hip, was a phone full of texts to Julian about how they were going to spend my money. "I am fine, Sarah," I said, my voice smooth. "Actually, I am glad I caught you. I need a favor." "Anything, Richard. You know that." I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. It was heavy, weighted with high-quality paper. I lowered my voice, leaning in conspiratorially. "This contains the access codes for the Swiss account, the Sentinel account, the one with the 50 million. I am going to initiate the biometric transfer right after the ceremony, but I need someone I trust to hold the physical backup keys until then. With all the people here, I do not want to keep it on me. I am afraid I might lose it, or have it picked from my pocket." Sarah's eyes widened behind her glasses. Her gaze locked onto the envelope like a starving dog spotting a steak. The greed was so naked, it was almost comical. "Oh, Richard," she breathed, reaching out. "You want me to hold it?" "You are the only one I trust, Sarah," I said, placing the envelope in her hand. "Guard it with your life. It is Elena's future in there." "I will," she promised, clutching it to her chest. "I will not let it out of my sight." I watched her walk away, hugging the envelope. She had no idea she was clutching a stack of dummy codes and a hidden GPS tracker that was currently logging her position for the federal agents outside. She thought she was holding the keys to the kingdom. She was actually holding her own indictment. I continued my patrol. I found Julian in the groom's holding area, a library on the first floor. He was nursing a scotch, staring out the window at the ocean. He looked every inch the brooding romantic hero. But as I watched from the doorway unobserved, I saw him check the inside pocket of his tuxedo. He pulled out 2 passports. He flipped them open, checked the photos, and slid them back. Then, he checked the other pocket for the plane tickets. He was not nervous about the wedding. He was nervous about the getaway. He turned and saw me. The mask slammed down instantly. A wide, brotherly grin plastered across his face. "Richard," he boomed. "Come to wish me luck." I walked into the room, keeping my hands clasped behind my back. "I do not think you need luck, Julian. You have planned everything so perfectly," he laughed, clinking the ice in his glass. "We tried. Elena wanted everything to be magical." "It will be unforgettable," I said. "I guarantee it." He looked at me, searching for any sign of suspicion. But I gave him nothing. I was the stoic older brother resigned to losing his sister. "I should get going," I said. "It is time to walk her down." "See you at the altar, brother," Julian said, raising his glass. I walked away, the word brother tasting like ash in my mouth. The ceremony was set on the cliffside lawn. Rows of white wooden chairs were filled with the elite of New York. I saw senators, tech moguls, and fashion icons. They whispered behind their programs, speculating on the cost of the flowers, the dress, the groom. The wind had picked up. It whipped the tablecloths and tore at the floral arrangements. The sky was turning a bruised purple on the horizon. A storm was coming. I stood at the entrance of the aisle. The music swelled. Pachelbel's canon played by the string quartet. The guests stood. Elena appeared at the top of the stairs. She was a vision. The dress I had paid for shimmered in the sunlight. Her veil drifted around her like mist. She held a bouquet of white roses, her knuckles white as she gripped the stems. She looked at me. Her eyes were pleading. She looked terrified. I offered her my arm. She took it. Her hand was trembling violently. "You can still stop this," she whispered so low that only I could hear. "We can just leave." It was too late. She had made her choice last night. This morning she was just afraid of the consequences. "Just walk, Elena," I said, staring straight ahead. "Smile for the cameras." We began the long walk down the aisle. The grass was soft under my shoes. The faces of the guests were a blur of smiles and tears. They saw a loving brother giving away his sister. They had no idea they were witnessing a funeral march. I felt Elena's weight on my arm. She was leaning on me, heavy with guilt and fear. I did not support her. I kept my arm rigid, a steel bar that she was shackled to. We moved closer to the altar, closer to where Julian stood waiting with his best man. A hired actor he claimed was an old friend from university. Sarah was standing on the left, holding the bride's train. She caught my eye and patted her clutch bag, signaling she had the codes safe. I gave her a small, tight nod. We reached the altar. The officiant, a bishop with a kindly face, smiled at us. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the bishop asked. The traditional answer was, "I do." I did not say it. I looked at the crowd. I looked at the cameras which were now broadcasting the ceremony to the giant LED screens set up for the guests in the back. I turned to Julian. I took Elena's hand from my arm. But instead of placing it in Julian's open palm, I grabbed Julian's hand with my right hand. I grabbed Elena's with my left. I pulled them together, but I did not let go. I squeezed. My grip was iron. I felt the bones in Julian's hand grind together. He winced, his smile faltering. "Richard," he whispered, confused. "Let go." I stepped in close. I invaded his personal space, my face inches from his. The microphone on his lapel picked up the rustle of my suit, but I pitched my voice below the frequency of the PA system. "I wanted this to be just for him." "I know about the arsenic, Marcus," I whispered. The color drained from his face as if I had pulled a plug. His eyes went wide, the pupils blowing out in sheer terror. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He tried to yank his hand away. I held on. I squeezed harder, feeling the satisfaction of his panic vibrating through his skin. "I know about the fake diagnosis," I hissed. "I know about the 5 million in Panama. And I know about the boat." He stopped struggling. He froze like a deer hearing the click of a rifle bolt. He looked past me, scanning the crowd, suddenly realizing that the sea of faces was not an audience, but a jury. I turned to Elena. She was shaking so hard, the flowers were falling from her bouquet. She knew. By looking at his face, she knew it was over. I released them. They stood there, two statues of guilt, stripped of their scripts. Julian looked ready to run. Elena looked ready to collapse. I turned my back on them. I faced the guests. I faced the cameras. I faced the world. The wind whipped my hair. I buttoned my jacket with a slow, deliberate movement. The silence on the lawn was absolute. The string quartet had stopped playing, sensing the tension. The guests were leaning forward, confused, whispering. I walked to the microphone stand that had been set up for the readings. I adjusted the height. I tapped it twice. Thump. Thump. The sound echoed across the estate, booming from the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice was calm, authoritative. It was the voice of the CEO, who had stared down hostile takeovers and market crashes. "I know we are all here to celebrate a union, to celebrate love." I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "But before we proceed with the vows, I have a wedding gift I want to share with everyone. It is not on the registry. It is something much more personal." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. Julian took a step toward me. "Richard, don't!" he shouted, his voice cracking. I did not look at him. I pointed the remote at the massive LED screen behind the altar, the one that had been displaying a slideshow of childhood photos of Elena. I pressed the button. The screen went black for a second, then static, and then the image flickered to life. It was grainy, black and white shot from a high angle, but the audio was crystal clear. It was the interior of fitting room number 5. The show was about to begin. The giant LED screen which had been cycling through a saccharine slideshow of Elena and Julian's courtship, photos taken by hired photographers to simulate intimacy, went black. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the wind whipping off the Atlantic, snapping the canvas of the reception tents like gunfire. The confused murmurs of the 300 guests rose like a tide. They looked from their programs to the blank screen, then to me. I did not step down from the podium. I gripped the sides of the lectern, my knuckles white, feeling the hum of the electricity beneath my fingertips. I was not just a brother anymore. I was the projectionist of their nightmares. Watch closely, I commanded my voice, booming through the surround sound speakers, usually reserved for live bands. The screen flared to life. It was not a polished video. It was the raw, grainy night vision footage from the hidden camera in fitting room number 5. The angle was high and wide, capturing the claustrophobic space filled with discarded silk and tulle. But the audio was perfect. Julian's voice, amplified to a deafening volume, rolled over the manicured lawn. "He is so incredibly stupid. I mean, honestly, babe, I thought cracking a CEO would be hard work. He practically handed me the keys to the kingdom." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. It sounded like the air being sucked out of the room. The senator in the front row dropped his champagne flute. The glass shattered on the pavers, but no one looked down. Every eye was glued to the screen. On the video, Elena's voice responded, clear and petulant. "He trusts family. That is his fatal flaw. It is actually pathetic if you think about it." I watched the real Elena. She was standing at the altar, frozen. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax statue, melting in the heat of exposure. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. She looked at the guests, seeing the shock and disgust reflecting back at her. The socialite mask she had worn for 26 years cracked. The video cut to the meat of the conversation, the plan. "We need something dramatic," Julian's recorded voice sneered. "Something that destroys his credibility before it destroys his mind. Once Richard is behind those walls, he is gone. No phone calls, no visitors, just a padded room." A woman in the third row, one of my mother's oldest friends, clamped her hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. The sheer malice of it, the casual way they discussed lobotomizing me for profit, was too much for the polite society of the Hamptons to process. I looked at Julian. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at the security guards posted at the perimeter. He was doing the math. He was calculating the distance to the parking lot. But I was not done. "That was just the appetizer," I said into the microphone, my voice cutting through the horrified buzzing of the crowd. "You have seen the conspiracy. Now let us look at loyalty." I pressed the button again. The screen flickered and changed. The date stamp in the corner was from just 3 days ago. The location: my own executive office at Veritas Systems. The angle showed the leather couch in the corner. Julian was there. And straddling him, her skirt hiked up to her waist, was Sarah. The crowd erupted. It was not a gasp this time. It was a roar of scandal. People stood up to get a better look. Phones were raised, recording the screen. This was not just a crime. It was a soap opera played out in real time. On the screen, Sarah laughed, throwing her head back. "God, I cannot wait until this is over. Watching that little idiot prance around in her white dress is making me sick." In the video, Julian stroked Sarah's hair. "Just a few more days, baby. Once the stupid cow signs the power of attorney and we transfer the cash, we are gone. We leave her with the debt, we leave Richard in the loony bin, and we wake up in the Maldives. The stupid cow! The words hung in the air, echoing off the cliffs. I looked at Elena. If the first video had paralyzed her with fear, this one shattered her with humiliation. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had been willing to kill her own brother for this man, and to him, she was nothing more than livestock. A stupid cow to be milked and slaughtered. The sound that came out of her throat was not human. It was a primal shriek of rage and betrayal. "No!" she screamed. She did not run away. She did not faint. She turned on the person closest to her. Sarah. Sarah was standing there clutching the envelope I had given her, her face a mask of absolute terror. She had nowhere to go. Elena launched herself at the maid of honor. It was a blur of white lace and pink chiffon. Elena tackled Sarah to the ground, right there at the foot of the altar. The bouquet of white roses was crushed instantly. Elena's fingernails, manicured for her special day, became talons. She clawed at Sarah's face, screaming obscenities that made the priest cross himself and step back. "You liar! You whore!" Elena shrieked, tearing at Sarah's hair. Sarah screamed, trying to shield her face with the envelope. The heavy paper ripped open. But instead of access codes, what fluttered out onto the grass were not numbers. They were copies of a federal arrest warrant. I watched the spectacle from the podium. It was ugly. It was violent. It was the complete disintegration of the dignity they had tried so hard to project. The wedding dress, the symbol of her purity and her triumph, ripped audibly at the seam, exposing the corset beneath. "Get them off each other!" someone shouted. Two of the undercover FBI agents, posing as ushers, rushed forward, pulling the women apart. Elena was panting, her hair wild blood under her fingernails. Sarah was sobbing, her glasses broken, clutching her cheek. I tapped the microphone again. "Enough," I said. The authority in my voice froze the chaos. The agents held the women back. Elena looked up at me. Her eyes were black holes of despair. "Richard," she gasped, reaching out a hand. "Richard, I didn't know about her." "You knew enough to kill me, Elena," I said, cold-heartedly. "You just didn't know you were the getaway driver, not the partner." I turned my attention to the groom. Julian had not moved to help the women. He had backed away near the edge of the cliff, his eyes darting frantically. "And as for you," I said, pointing the remote at the screen one last time, "let us introduce everyone to the real groom." The screen changed again. This time it was a police mugshot. It was younger, rawer, but undeniably him. "Meet Marcus Vane I," narrated. "Wanted in France for fraud, wanted in Italy for grand larceny and suspicion of manslaughter." A series of photos flashed on the screen. An older man in a coffin. A young woman crying outside a foreclosed chateau. A foreclosure notice on a vineyard. "These are the people he left behind," I said. "Families destroyed. Fortunes stolen. Lives ended. He is not a businessman, ladies and gentlemen. He is a parasite." Then I played my trump card. I gestured to the back row of the seated guests. "Please welcome a special guest who traveled a long way to be here today," I announced. Isabella stood up. She was wearing a simple black dress, dignified and severe. She walked slowly down the aisle, the sea of guests parting for her. She walked straight up to the altar, stopping 10 feet from Julian. He looked at her, as if he were seeing a corpse rise from the grave. His arrogant facade crumbled completely. His mouth worked, but no words came. "Hello, Arthur," Isabella said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence of the lawn, it carried like a bell. "Or is it Julian now? You forgot to sign the divorce papers before you ran away with my inheritance." She reached into her purse and pulled out the Polaroid photo, the one of his back. She held it up for the cameras. "Show them the tattoo, Arthur," she challenged. "Show them the snake that eats its own tail. Because that is what you are. You eat everything until there is nothing left." Julian, Marcus, looked at the crowd. He saw the judgment. He saw the end of his life as a free man. He looked at the police cars that were now screeching up the long driveway sirens, wailing blue lights, flashing against the darkening sky. The game was up. The crocodile file had snapped shut. And that was when the animal took over. Marcus looked at the approaching agents. He looked at the cliff drop behind him, too high to survive. He looked at me, standing safely on the podium. He let out a snarl. It was a guttural, ugly sound. He lunged, not at me, not at Sarah. He lunged at Elena. She was still on her knees, sobbing. He grabbed her by her torn hair and yanked her up. His other hand went into his tuxedo jacket. He did not pull out a ring. He pulled out a knife, a sleek, ceramic blade that had bypassed the metal detectors I had set up for the guests. He must have taped it to his chest. He wrapped his arm around Elena's neck, pressing the blade against her jugular. "Back off!" he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Back off, or I will open her throat right here!" The crowd screamed and scrambled back, overturning chairs. The FBI agents drew their weapons, instantly leveling them at his chest. "Drop the knife!" an agent shouted. "Do not come any closer!" Marcus yelled, dragging Elena backward toward the edge of the cliff. "I mean it! I have nothing to lose!" Elena was not screaming anymore. She was paralyzed with terror, her hands clawing feebly at the arm choking her. She looked at me. Her eyes were bulging. "Richard!" she choked out. "Help me!" I stood on the podium looking down at them. The wind howled, whipping Marcus's hair into his eyes. He looked manic, sweaty, and pathetic. This was the man she had chosen over me. This was the man she had plotted with. And now he was using her as a human shield. It was a perfect, tragic tableau. The bride in her ruined dress, held hostage by the groom she thought was her prince, while the brother she tried to kill held the remote control to her destruction. I stepped down from the podium. I walked slowly across the grass, ignoring the agents shouting at me to stay back. I stopped 5 yards from them. "Let her go, Marcus," I said calmly. "There is nowhere to run. The accounts are frozen. The boat is seized. Sarah has already flipped on you. Look at her." I pointed to Sarah, who was handcuffed on the ground, weeping into the grass. "It is over," I said. "Do not add murder to the list. You will get life, but you will live. You cut her, and the snipers on the roof will put a bullet in your brain before she hits the ground." Marcus looked up at the roof of the manor. He saw the glint of the scopes. He was trapped. "I want a helicopter!" he shouted, the desperation making him irrational. "I want a flight out of here!" "You are not getting a helicopter, Marcus," I said, taking another step. "You are getting a cell." He pressed the knife harder. A thin line of red blood appeared on Elena's white neck, staining the lace of her collar. "Stay back!" he shrieked. I stopped. I looked at Elena. I saw the realization in her eyes. She finally understood. He was never going to take her to the Maldives. He was never going to love her. He was always going to kill her one way or another. "I am sorry, Richard," she mouthed. I looked at Marcus. "You lose," I said simply. And then I gave the signal. Not to the snipers, but to the screen. I pressed the button one last time. A deafening siren blared from the speakers, an audio feedback loop screeching at a frequency designed to incapacitate. It was a sonic weapon Victor had installed for this exact moment. Marcus flinched his hands, flying up to his ears instinctively to block out the pain. The knife moved an inch away from Elena's neck. That was all the opening needed. The screech of the sonic weapon cut out, leaving a ringing silence that was even louder than the noise itself. On the cliffside lawn, the scene had dissolved into absolute bedlam. The guests, the cream of New York society, who had arrived expecting champagne and string quartets, were now scrambling over the white wooden chairs in a blind panic. I saw a famous fashion designer trip over her own gown and crawl toward the hedges. I saw tech moguls diving behind the buffet tables. The illusion of civilized order had shattered, replaced by the primal instinct to survive. But at the altar, time seemed to stand still. Marcus, I could no longer think of him as Julian, was panting heavily, his chest heaving against the back of my sister. The knife was still there, pressed against the soft skin of her throat. A thin trickle of blood, bright red against the white lace, mapped a path down her collarbone. Elena was not screaming anymore. She was hyperventilating, her eyes fixed on me, wide and glassy, with a terror that went beyond the fear of death. It was the fear of total exposure. The FBI agents formed a semicircle, their weapons drawn and steady. The red laser dots danced on Marcus's forehead and chest, a constellation of imminent violence. But they held their fire. The risk to the hostage was too high. I stood 5 yards away, my hands raised slightly to show I was unarmed, but my posture remained relaxed. I did not look like a man whose sister was being held at knife point. I looked like a CEO negotiating a hostile takeover. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" Marcus spat, his voice cracking. He adjusted his grip, dragging Elena back another inch toward the cliff edge. The drop was 200 feet to the jagged rocks below. The surf was pounding, hungry and violent. "Back off, Richard. I swear to God I will take her with me." I took a half step forward, ignoring the warning. The wind whipped my tie over my shoulder. "You are not going to jump, Marcus," I said, my voice calm, cutting through the wind. "You are a narcissist. Narcissists do not commit suicide. They think they can outsmart the system until the very last second. You are calculating the odds right now. You are wondering if you can use her as a shield to get to the parking lot." "I want a car," he screamed. "I want clear passage to the airport." "No," I said. I shook my head slowly. "You are not listening. The game is over. The board has been flipped. And you are holding a hostage that has no value." Elena let out a whimpering sob at those words. "She is your sister," Marcus yelled. "Is she?" I asked coldly. I looked at Elena, locking eyes with her. "My sister died the moment she agreed to put me in an asylum. The woman you are holding is just your accomplice. And here is the thing about accomplices, Marcus. They are the first ones to turn on you." I paused, letting the words sink in. I saw his eyes darting. He was listening. "Just like Sarah," I added. Marcus stiffened. "What?" I gestured casually toward Sarah, who was currently face down in the grass 10 feet away, her hands cuffed behind her back by an agent. She was sobbing into the dirt. "You did not think we figured this out yesterday?" I lied smoothly. "Sarah has been in custody for 30 minutes. She cut a deal, Marcus. Full immunity in exchange for your head on a platter. She gave us the bank codes. She gave us the flight logs. She even told us about the knife you taped to your chest. Who do you think disabled the metal detector at the gate? It was a lie. A complete fabrication. Sarah had been just as blindsided as he was. But in the high-stakes pressure cooker of the moment, with adrenaline flooding his brain, Marcus did not have the capacity for logic. He only had paranoia. And his paranoia had been fed by a lifetime of betraying others, so he naturally assumed everyone was betraying him. "No," he whispered. "She told us you forced her." I continued twisting the knife. "She said you were the mastermind. She painted herself as the victim. She is going to walk free, Marcus, while you rot in a supermax cell. She played you." The reaction was visceral. The betrayal of his partner, the woman he actually loved, or at least lusted after, was the one thing that could break his focus. Marcus's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He forgot about the snipers. He forgot about the cliff. He forgot about Elena. He turned his head, his eyes locking onto Sarah's prone form. "You bitch!" he roared. Sarah, hearing his scream, lifted her head from the grass. Her glasses were gone, her face streaked with mascara and dirt. "No!" she wailed, her voice shrill with panic. "No, Julian! He is lying! I did not say anything, I swear!" But her denial sounded like guilt to his ears. "You sold me out!" Marcus shrieked. In his rage, he shifted. He took one hand off Elena to point the knife accusingly at Sarah. That was the mistake. That was the split second of distraction we needed. The officiant, the kindly old bishop with the white hair, who had been standing frozen by the altar, moved. He did not move like a priest. He moved like a linebacker. This was Agent Miller, a veteran field operative Victor had placed in the role weeks ago. He covered the 6 feet between them in a blur of motion. He did not tackle Marcus high. He went low, driving his shoulder into Marcus's midsection with the force of a battering ram. The air left Marcus's lungs in a sickening whoosh. The impact lifted him off his feet. The ceramic knife flew from his hand, spinning in the air, before clattering harmlessly onto the stone pavers of the patio. Elena was thrown clear. She landed hard on her side, skidding across the grass, her wedding dress tearing further at the hem. She scrambled away on her hands and knees, gasping for air, looking like a broken doll. "Get off me!" Marcus screamed, thrashing on the ground. Agent Miller did not let up. He drove Marcus's face into the dirt, wrenching his arm behind his back with a sickening pop. 2 other agents swarmed in their knees, pinning Marcus's legs and shoulders. The click of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "Secure!" Miller shouted. "Subject is secure!" Across the lawn, another team hauled Sarah to her feet. She was hysterical, her legs giving out, forcing the agents to drag her. "It was not me," she was screaming, looking wildly around the garden. "It was all him. He made me do it. He promised me money. Richard, please. I was afraid of him." I watched them. The 2 architects of my destruction reduced to screaming, finger-pointing children. They were not masterminds. They were just greedy small people who had mistaken kindness for weakness. "Get them out of here," I ordered, my voice flat. The police began to march them toward the patrol cars. Marcus was still fighting, spitting curses at me, at Sarah, at the world. Sarah was weeping her pleas, fading as she was shoved into the back of a cruiser. And then there was silence. The wind kept blowing. The waves kept crashing. But the threat was gone. Only one piece of business remained. I turned to look at Elena. She was kneeling in the grass near the altar. Her hair was a bird's nest. Her makeup was ruined. The red mark on her neck was already bruising. She looked small. She looked pathetic. She looked up at me. Her eyes were swimming with tears, but behind the tears, I saw the gears turning. I saw her trying to find the narrative that would save her. She saw her brother standing there. The brother who had always fixed everything, the brother who had always forgiven her. "Richard," she sobbed. I walked over to her. I stood over her, casting a long shadow that fell across her face. I did not offer her a hand. I did not kneel down to comfort her. I stood tall, the judge and the executioner. "Bubba," she whispered, using the childhood nickname she hadn't used in 10 years. "Oh my God, Bubba." I was so scared. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my pants. Her grip was desperate. "He was going to kill you," she cried. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know he was that crazy. He tricked me. He told me we were just going to get you help." I looked down at her hand on my leg. I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just a cold, heavy exhaustion. "Get up, Elena," I said. She scrambled to her feet, swaying slightly. She tried to throw her arms around me, but I took a step back. She froze, her arms empty in the air. "Richard," she asked, her voice trembling, "why are you looking at me like that? I am the victim here. You saw him. He held a knife to my throat." "Yes," I said. "He did. And that was the only part of today that wasn't scripted by you." "What?" she gasped. "No. Richard, how can you say that? I love you. I am your sister. I was brainwashed. He manipulated me." I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out my phone. "Stop it, Elena," I said. "Just stop. You can lie to the police. You can lie to the press. You can even lie to yourself. But do not lie to me. Not anymore." I tapped the screen. I selected the audio file named Elena_confession_04. The sound of her voice, crisp and clear, cut through the wind. It was not the voice of a scared victim. It was the voice of a greedy, impatient woman. "I want the money now, Julian. I do not want to wait for him to die of old age. I want to live my life while I am still young and beautiful. He is so controlling. I want him gone." The recording ended. Elena stood there. Her mouth was open, but the protests died in her throat. The color that had started to return to her cheeks vanished again, leaving her gray. She looked at the phone, as if it were a smoking gun. That was taken out of context. She stammered, her voice weak. "I was just venting. I didn't mean it." I shook my head. I played another clip. Diagnosis of acute psychotic break. Indefinite hold. Once Richard is behind those walls, he is gone. And then her response. "Good. I am so tired of waiting." I put the phone back in my pocket. "You were not tricked, Elena," I said softly. "You were not a damsel in distress. You were a co-conspirator. You sat in that room, you tried on a dress that I paid for, and you agreed to erase my mind. You agreed to lock me in a cage and throw away the key so you could spend my money." "Richard, please," she begged, dropping to her knees again. "I am sorry. I was wrong. I will do anything. Take the money back. Take the company. Just don't let them take me." I looked at the police officers walking toward us. They were carrying a fresh pair of handcuffs. "I cannot stop them, Elena," I said. "And even if I could, I wouldn't." She grabbed my hand, kissing my knuckles, her tears wetting my skin. "But he betrayed me too," she wailed. "He was going to kill me. Doesn't that count for anything?" I pulled my hand away. I took a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped the spot where she had touched me. "It counts," I said. "It means you were stupid. It means you trusted a shark not to bite you." The officers arrived. One of them was a detective I recognized from the task force. "Elena Davis?" he asked. She didn't answer. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You are under arrest," the detective said, pulling her arms behind her back. "For what?" she screamed, struggling as the cold metal clicked around her wrists. "I am the victim. My fiancé tried to kill me." "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and embezzlement," the detective recited, his voice bored. "You have the right to remain silent." They hauled her up. She fought them. She kicked and screamed, her wedding dress dragging in the mud, her veil tearing off and blowing away in the wind. "Richard, help me. Richard, tell them. Tell them I am your sister." I watched her. I watched the girl I had protected my whole life being dragged away like a common criminal. "You are not my sister," I said, though she could no longer hear me over her own screaming. "My sister died in a fitting room 3 days ago." As they pushed her into the back of the squad car, she looked out the window one last time. Her face was pressed against the glass, distorted and ugly with fear. She mouthed one word, "Please." I turned away. I looked out at the ocean. The sun was setting now, painting the water in shades of blood and gold. The tents were flapping empty. The guests were gone. The party was over. I was the last man standing. I had won. I had destroyed my enemies. I had saved my company. I had kept my life. But as I stood there on the edge of the cliff, listening to the sirens fade into the distance, I felt a terrible lightness in my chest. It was the lightness of having nothing left to lose. I took a deep breath of the salt air. It tasted clean. It tasted like survival. "I am ready," I whispered to the wind. I turned and walked back toward the empty house. The nightmare was over. Now I had to figure out how to wake up. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, taking the last of the warmth with it. The floodlights that had been rigged for the reception were now acting as crime scene illumination, casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn. The wind had died down, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I stood on the edge of the stone patio, looking out at the black expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Behind me, the ruins of the wedding lay scattered, like the bones of a prehistoric beast. White wooden chairs were overturned, some splintered from the stampede of guests fleeing the scene. The elaborate floral arrangements, imported orchids that had cost thousands of dollars, were trampled into the mud, their delicate white petals stained brown and crushed underfoot. A half-eaten wedding cake sat melting on a table, a grotesque monument to a celebration that never happened. The police cars had gone. The FBI trucks had packed up. The guests were long gone, whisked away in their limousines, undoubtedly already on their phones, spilling the scandalous details to anyone who would listen. I was alone. Or at least I thought I was. The crunch of leather shoes on gravel broke the silence. I did not turn around. I knew who it was. "It is done," Victor's voice came from behind me. It was low, devoid of triumph. He understood that this was not a victory lap. It was a memorial service. I took a sip of the stale champagne I had been holding for an hour. "Is it?" Victor stepped up beside me, looking out at the water. "I just got off the phone with the district attorney. The arraignment is set for tomorrow morning. The judge denied bail for all three of them." "All three," I repeated. The number sounded strange. Usually, it was just the couple. Now it was a trio of conspirators. "Yes," Victor said. "Julian, or Marcus rather, is being charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, fraud, and about a dozen other felonies. The extradition requests from France and Italy are already coming in. He is never seeing the light of day again. Sarah is singing like a canary, but it won't save her. She is looking at 15 to 20 years for conspiracy and embezzlement." "And Elena?" I asked. The name felt like a jagged piece of glass in my throat. Victor paused. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "She is in the holding cell at the county precinct. She has been asking for you. She is hysterical. She claims she needs a lawyer. She says you will pay for the best defense team in the city, because you are her brother." I looked down at the dark water crashing against the rocks below. I remembered the times I had bailed her out before. The credit card debt I paid off when she was 20. The car accident she caused when she was 22. The failed business venture I covered when she was 24. I had always been the safety net. I had always been the checkbook. "Do not answer her calls," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. Victor nodded slowly. "And regarding legal representation? The Davis family lawyer is on retainer. He is waiting for your instructions. Fire him," I said. "Or rather, tell him he is forbidden from representing Elena Davis." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Richard, if she goes in with a public defender against these charges, she will get slaughtered." I turned to face him. The wind blew cold against my face, stinging my eyes. Elena wanted to be an adult Victor. She wanted the money. She wanted the freedom. She wanted to make decisions without her controlling big brother looking over her shoulder. Well, this is what adulthood looks like. Consequences are not something you can call your brother to fix. I took a deep breath, the salt air filling my lungs. She conspired to kill me. She watched a man hold a knife to my throat, and only cried out when she realized the money was gone. She is a criminal, Victor, and she will be tried like one, if the state provides her with a public defender that is good enough. It is more than she would have given me if I was locked in Blackwood. Victor held my gaze for a long moment, searching for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he nodded. "Understood. I will inform the precinct that you have no relation to the defendant and will not be covering her legal fees." "Thank you," I said. We stood there for a moment longer, two men in the wreckage of a family. "What about the cleanup?" Victor asked, gesturing to the overturned tables. "Leave it for the morning," I said. "Let the seagulls eat the cake. I am done with this place." The next week was a blur of sterile boardrooms and uncomfortable silences. I returned to Veritas Systems on Monday morning at 8 o'clock sharp. The news had broken over the weekend and the atmosphere in the building was thick with tension. People stopped talking when I walked by, eyes averted. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. I was the CEO who had almost been murdered by his own sister. I was the man who had publicly destroyed his family on a live stream. I did not care about their pity. I cared about the infection in my company. I called an emergency meeting of the board. I walked in through a stack of files on the mahogany table and sat at the head. "We are starting over," I announced. By noon, I had fired the entire Human Resources Directorate and the Chief Financial Officer. They had not been part of the murder plot, but their negligence had allowed Sarah to manipulate the payroll and the hiring process for years. They had been asleep at the wheel, and I had no tolerance for sleepers anymore. I walked through the executive wing, the place where Sarah used to rule. Her desk was still there, covered in photos of her cats, and a little sign that said, "Girl Boss." It made me sick. "Clear it out," I told the security guard. "Burn it. I want this entire floor sanitized. I want a forensic audit of every single expense report filed in the last 5 years. If anyone stole so much as a stapler, I want to know." I spent the next 3 days rebuilding. I hired a new assistant, a 60-year-old woman named Martha, who had zero interest in office politics and typed like a machine gun. I restructured the accounts. I instituted new security protocols that required triple authentication for any transfer over $10,000. Veritas Systems was going to survive. It was going to be leaner, colder, and more efficient, just like its owner. On Thursday afternoon, I took a drive. I did not take the limousine. I drove my own car, navigating the chaotic traffic of Midtown Manhattan until I reached Fifth Avenue. I parked in front of Magda's Bridal boutique. The shop looked the same. The mannequins in the window were still wearing clouds of white silk, smiling their plastic, unknowing smiles. I pushed the door open, the little bell chiming above my head. Magda was behind the counter sewing beads onto a veil. When she looked up and saw me, she dropped her needle. She hurried around the counter, her arms wide open. "Mr. Davis," she cried. "Oh, thank God." "I saw the news. I saw the video. I have been praying for you every night." She hugged me. It was a fierce, motherly hug that smelled of lavender and fabric starch. For the first time since the wedding, I felt a lump form in my throat. I hugged her back, burying my face in her shoulder for a brief second. "I am okay, Magda," I said, pulling back gently. "I am okay because of you." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a check. I had written it that morning. "It was for $500,000, Magda," I said. "This is for you." She looked at the check, her eyes widening behind her spectacles. "Richard, no, I cannot take this. This is too much." "It is not enough," I said firmly, pressing it into her hand. "You saved my life. You pulled me into that room. You gave me the recording. If you had just stayed quiet, if you had just minded your own business, like everyone else, I would be in a padded room right now. But I just did what was right." She stammered, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "That is a rare thing these days," I said. "Take it. Retire. Go to Italy. Renovate the shop. Do whatever you want. You earned it." She looked at me, clutching the check to her chest. "You are a good man, Richard. You did not deserve this." I smiled, and this time it felt a little less forced. "I deserve to know the truth, Magda, and you gave that to me." I left the shop before I could break down. Walking back to my car, I realized something profound. I had spent my life thinking family was the people who shared my last name. I thought it was the blood in our veins that bound us. But Elena shared my blood, and she had tried to drain mine. Magda was a stranger who sold dresses, and she had saved me. Family was not biology. Family was behavior. It was loyalty. It was the people who stood by you when the lights went out. I was an orphan in the eyes of the law now, but I felt less alone than I had in years. That evening, I returned to the penthouse. It was quiet. The kind of silence that used to terrify me, the silence I used to fill with dinner parties and Elena's laughter. Now I welcomed it. It was the silence of safety. I walked to the bar and poured myself a glass of Cabernet, a bottle Julian had bought with my money a month ago. I drank it with a grim satisfaction. It tasted better, knowing he was drinking tap water in a holding cell. I walked out onto the terrace. The city of New York lay spread out before me, a grid of glittering lights. Millions of people, millions of stories, millions of secrets. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was the one I had taken from the mantelpiece the night I found out. Me and Elena. We were smiling. I was graduating from college, and she was looking up at me with what I thought was adoration. Now, looking closer, I wondered if I could see the envy even then. Was it always there? Was I just too blind to see the snake in the garden because I was too busy building the walls? It didn't matter anymore. I took a silver lighter from the table. I flicked the wheel. The flame jumped up, dancing in the wind. I held the corner of the photograph to the fire. The paper curled and blackened. The flame ate through my graduation gown. It ate through Elena's smile. It consumed the lie that we were a happy family. I watched it burn until the heat nipped at my fingertips. I dropped the burning remnant into a ceramic ashtray and watched it turn to ash. A gust of wind caught the gray flakes, lifting them up and carrying them away over the city, scattering them into the void. "Goodbye, Elena," I whispered. I turned my back on the city. I walked back inside the penthouse and slid the heavy glass door shut, locking it with a solid, satisfying click. I picked up my wine glass. I had a company to run. I had a life to live. And for the first time in 42 years, that life belonged entirely to me. I was Richard Davis. I was a survivor. And I was finally free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a journey into the darkest corners of betrayal, and I hope it kept you on the edge of your seat. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below, telling me which country or city you are listening in from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and resilience, please subscribe to Calm Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people. Your support means the world to me. Stay safe and watch your back.